Germany's in a recession. Germany is in a recession. They've had the full year GDP in 2023 declined. First quarter data looks like a continuing decline to the extent you get monthly data, more frequent data. It's very negative for Germany. I just bought a brand new German sports sedan. By the way, my old car I had for 15 years. It had 250,000 miles on it. So I figured it was about time, but I can't. But the new one, I'm very careful about the specification. It was made in Germany, which is good. But the engine was made in Hungary. And I was fine with that. The Hungarians are smart and they're productive, and I'm sure they had good quality control. But I thought, gee, isn't that interesting that Germans are outsourcing the engine production to Hungary the way Americans are outsourcing everything? Well, it used to be China, now it's Mexico. Why can't Germany make those engines the way they used to? Well, the answer is the energy costs are too high. The two biggest industries in Germany are chemicals and automotive manufacturing, and they're both very energy intensive. Leave aside the fact that you're making internal combustion engines, it just takes a lot of energy to run those factories, and they're outsourcing everything because the internal energy costs are too high. Well, they're the ones who, if not directly, certainly with NATO, blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. So what do you expect? And then again, on an even bigger platform, bigger frame, the U.S. economic sanctions on Russia because of the war in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And again, if you're in a war, economic sanctions on your enemy are not unusual. But I teach a seminar on financial warfare at the U.S. Army War College, and it's a kind of a handpicked class, 12 or 13 students. And when I did the class in 2022, it was in April, and it was right after the war began. And I said, let me tell you what's going to happen. We had already put a lot of sanctions on, but there were new ones coming out every day, almost every day. I said, here are the sanctions, here are the legal authorities. We froze their accounts. We banned their exports of strategic metals. We banned their exports of oil and natural gas. We banned imports to Russia of technological equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember Biden screaming, we're going to destroy the ruble, we're going to sink the ruble, et cetera. And I said, none of this is going to work. Not only will it not slow down the Russian economy, it will actually boomerang and hurt us, meaning the Western Europe and the United States, more than it hurts the Russians. And I got a lot of pushback from the class. They were all, gung ho. I mean, I don't blame them. They're military. They want to win a war or whatever. But I said it's not political. I said, I can just tell you that's what's going to happen. The people in charge of it, Wally Adeyemo, who's the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, let alone Janet Yellen, who's completely clueless. She's our Treasury Secretary. Mm-hmm. Said they understand the law, at least Wally does. Yellen does not. But they don't understand economics. They don't understand how easy it is to work around sanctions, how easy it is to use import substitution, et cetera. So anyway, I taught the class again last spring. I guess my next one will be coming up in a couple of months. But in the spring of 2023, I taught the class. I said, let me tell you what I taught last year's class. And I kind of went down the list. And I said, and I was right about everything. Wow. I was right that the sanctions wouldn't work. I was right that they would boomerang. Today, the biggest problem in the Russian economy is a labor shortage. That economy is booming. It grew about 5% in the fourth quarter of 2023. The ruble is stable. It had the big dip, and then it came all the way back, and then it was stable for the better part of a year. Over a year, went down a little bit, but not a lot. That had to do with oil prices. If they have an economic problem, they have a little bit of inflation, which means your economy is running hot. So Vera Nabiullina, who's the head of the Central Bank of Russia, I say she's the only central banker in the world who actually knows her job. She raised interest rates a little bit just to cool it off. But they have labor shortages. And one of the reasons they have labor shortages is not only did they put the economy on a complete war footing, but so many people are enlisting in the military that they can't get workers in their 20s. I mean, this is, the myth in the West, what you would read in, in the Sydney and Melbourne newspapers, or the Financial Times, or the Economist, the New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, is, Russia, the troops the morale is low, they're poorly trained, their officers are all sitting around drinking vodka, they don't have a doctrine, military doctrine, et cetera. They're all lies. Every single one of those things is a lie. The fact is, they're winning the war. They're advancing on the entire battle line from Avdiivka to Kupiansk, and Liman and a number of Bakhmut and a number of other points in between. They're advancing, but the Russians take their time. All you have to do is look at the Eastern Front in World War II. I mean,
Yeah.
there were get the number right, 20 million people killed in combat, and I think another 10 million civilians. But the Germans came in and they killed 5 million Russians. And the Wehrmacht said, okay, we're on the outskirts of Moscow. We've taken Stalingrad. We've surrounded Leningrad. Today's St. Petersburg. We've killed 5 million Germans, or sorry, 5 million Russians. But then the Russians came back with 5 million more, and then 5 million more. In other words, the Wehrmacht and the German intelligence had no idea quite what they were dealing with in terms of Russia's ability to mobilize, and that's still true. But you look at the Battle of Kursk in 1944, late 43, early 44, they didn't rush into anything. They had a war of attrition. They wore down the Germans, and then they surrounded them. They enveloped them in what's called a cauldron, and they annihilated them. But they weren't in any hurry about it. And it was only when the Germans had been annihilated that they moved through Warsaw and Berlin. Well, they're doing the same thing in Ukraine. They're not marching to Kiev, not yet. Give them time, but they are annihilating the Ukrainians on the battlefront. And now that the U.S. Congress looks like it's not going to approve any further aid to Ukraine,
Yeah.
the EU did it reluctantly, but even the EU, I think it was 50 billion euros, if I'm not mistaken. But Hungary insisted that that be in 4 annual installments, not all at once. So whatever that comes to, it's like 13 million. 13 million euros is not going to. That's barely enough to pay the oligarchs in Ukraine, and the U.S. is contributing nothing right now. So Ukraine is losing badly on all fronts. But getting back to the economics of it, which is where we started, the Russian economy is booming. They're running a little hot. They have labor shortages. They're on a total war footing. They're making several million 155 millimeter shells per year. The United States and NATO's arsenals have been depleted. We don't have any more 155 millimeter shells. That's why we're sending them these cluster bombs, because that's all we have left. The U.S. is begging places like South Korea, which had some, to say, hey, could you give us your 155 millimeter shells, we'll send them to Ukraine. South Korea says, well, we might need them ourselves because the North Koreans are making noise. The Israelis need them to fight in Gaza. And so how did the Western arsenals get completely depleted? That was the other thing. We're going to wear the Russians down. There'll be nothing left of them by the time we're done. Again, Carrie, the opposite has happened. The Western arsenals are depleted. The German Leopard tanks are blown up on the battlefield. The British Challenger tanks are blown up on the battlefield. The United States sent them some Abrams tanks, which is our top of the line tanks. The Pentagon called Zelensky and said, please don't use them, because we don't want any pictures of them burning on the battlefield. It's really bad for sales. So they have some Abrams, but they won't use them because they know the Russians will blow them up with mines, drones, artillery, and bombing. It's kind of, the world's turned upside down. But again, just to summarize, whether it's Ukraine, strategic metals, uranium, which you mentioned, energy generation, industrial production, deindustrialization, you can't understand, and they're all big topics. You can't understand any of them separately from the Green New scam, and financial warfare, and a lot else going on the political side.